In this demonstration, you will learn how to define a binding converter as a resource, which is a typical use case for SAML resources. Let's switch to Visual Studio. In our project, let's expand the View folder and let's open the Customers View SAML file. In this file, you have defined here a converter that is referenced here in this data binding with a static resource markup extension. The converter converts the value of the navigation site property into an integer value that can be used for the attached grid.column property. In our solution, you have created that converter here in the converter folder. WPF has also a built-in converter, the so-called Boolean to visibility converter. Let's run the application and let me show you a task where you need that converter. Let's assume that you want to hide here these details if no customer is selected in the list view. So let's stop the application again. When you scroll down in the Customers View SAML file, you can see here the stack panel that defines the customer details. This means you need to hide this stack panel if no customer is selected. As we are using the MVVM pattern, let's go to the Solution Explorer. Let's expand here the View Model folder and let's open the Customers View Model class. I scroll down a bit in this class and here, after the selected customer property, let's use the prop snippet to define a property of type bool that I call isCustomerSelected. And I just use an expression body and I check here if the selected customer property is not null. Now the binding should also know when this property here was changed. To notify the data binding about the change of this property, you need to raise the property changed event in the setter of the selected customer property. So here, let's call the raise property changed method with the name of that new isCustomerSelected property. Now you have this property in the view model and you can bind to it in the SAML document of the customer's view. So here on the stack panel, let's set now the visibility property. As you can see, this property is of type of an enumeration. Visible is the default value, which means the stack panel is visible. Hidden means that the stack panel is not visible, but it still occupies space in the layout. Collapsed means that it is not visible and it does not occupy any space in the layout. Now instead of setting this property to any of these values, let's just use a data binding and let's bind to the isCustomerSelected property of our view model that is in the data context. Now let's run the customers application and you can see no customer is selected, but the details are still visible. Let's open here in Visual Studio the SAML binding failures window and you can see here a failure for the visibility property. The error says, cannot create default converter to perform conversions between Boolean and visibility. Consider using converter property of binding. So let's stop the application again. This means also here you need to set the converter property of the data binding to convert this bool value into a type of the visibility enumeration. To do this, WPF has a Boolean to visibility converter. As this is a common converter that you might need at different places in your application, let's define it application-wide in the app.saml file. So let's open the app.saml file and let's use here the Boolean to visibility converter. Let's set the xKey attribute to the class and I just call it at the end justConf. Now let's close this element and now this converter is available. Let's go back to the Solution Explorer and let's open again the Customers View SAML file. Here on the binding, you can set now the converter property with a static resource markup extension and you can use now here this Boolean to visibility converter. Now let's run the application again and let's see if this works. Yes, as you can see, no customer is selected and the details are not visible. Now let's select a customer and the details come up Let's delete this customer. Now the details disappeared again as no customer is selected. Great! So now this works actually in our application thanks to the Boolean to visibility converter. In the next clip, you will learn how you can move resources into a separate SAML file.